Welcome to Season 2 of Robbie Burns and Friends. This season is all about my brand new book, Digital Organization Tips for Music Teachers, which is first in the Prestissimo series, a series of technology tip books for music educators, published by Oxford University Press. Each episode, I will discuss one chapter of the book with an expert on that subject. For example, on the episode about note-taking, I will chat with a music education specialist who is an expert on note-taking. The goal of the podcast is to offer complementary material, not simply a regurgitation of the content in the chapter being discussed. Think of these as kind of like a B-side of each chapter of the book, or even better yet, a counterpoint, complete with meta-discussion and even an extension of the ideas already in the book into new territory as provided by the experience of the guest. This week's guest, joining the show again, Chris Russel, here to talk about working with digital scores on your iPad. The episode that we're doing today is, in fact, on the chapter in my book about scores. And we did this 2 episodes ago. We talked about scanning. And then last episode, I actually haven't released this one yet, but I got together with Paul Shimmons and we got to chat person to person for the first time, which was very fun. And we talked about the subject of PDFs, which, you know, as far as their connection to scanning goes, I mean, I think of them as being able to handle any kind of document that is or isn't sheet music necessarily. And well, this week it's all about just sheet music. Music that however it got into your device, whether you scanned it or whether you downloaded it or bought it, and whatever you did, somehow now you have a digital piece of sheet music, and now what are you going to do with it? And you were the perfect person who came to my mind to talk about this with for a number of reasons, but one of which was you presented an entire session on this when you came to present at our Maryland Music Educators Conference this past February.
Yeah, and we talked specifically about, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I thought I lost you for a second there. We talked specifically about forScore in that session. So ultimately what we did was we went through every menu item in forScore and talked about what each of those menu items did and all the possibilities. And where it really gets tricky is in that final toolbox where forScore has 8 million possibilities. It's rather insane, all the things
your
it has.
session was so thorough. I loved how you just went through every single one of those features in the toolbar.
Yeah, and they just keep adding stuff with every iteration of this software, and they make things that just make more sense. Like for the first time, if you have a piece of music that you've scanned and it's a little bit skewed the wrong way, you can actually de-skew it yourself now in forScore. If you have a situation where you want to crop all of your pages of a song, you can do that page by page or by score. You've always been able to rearrange. Now, but in addition to forScore, there's so many other solutions to reading music. There's UnrealBook that's out there. There is I've used with my students Showbie, the app Showbie, because basically all it gives them the opportunity to do is to write on their music and change pages. What I found out with middle school students in a one-to-one is if they have 800 buttons, they will press every one of the 800 buttons instead of doing what they're supposed to be doing in class.
Yeah. Is Showbie, quick aside, is Showbie, is that an actual application, or is that like more of a web service?
It is both. It started off as an iPad-only app, but it now has a web-based function that does most of what the iPad app does. The iPad app still does couple more things, but basically Showbie's just a way to deal with digital distribution of materials and collection of materials. And in terms of PDFs,
a little bit like an LMS. Would you describe it as?
Showbie calls themselves a light LMS, but it's not really an LMS. So it doesn't do any automatic grading, although you can do some grading in it. It has a portfolio feature, but it's not a full portfolio program like Seesaw. It's just kind of a unique thing of its own, and I love it. And the other thing I love about it too is you can have students record a voice note inside of it. So if you're in a one-to-one iPad setting, or your kids have any device at home, you could literally have them record on a document something, so sight reading, rhythm, audition material. They could record something and submit it, then you as a teacher could go back later and play it back. But in context, what we're talking about here is just the thing I love about is that I can create a folder that only they can get to, in the class. They have to sign up for a class with a code. And then they can access that music in school or at home. And they can turn from song to song. They can change pages. They can annotate if needed. They can, and that's it. There's no other tools there. I was also using an app called piaScore that's free for PDF music. And that's got a lot of nice features, but it has a whole bunch of free stuff like a piano or a YouTube viewer. And I emailed the developer and said, I don't want a YouTube viewer on an app that's being used in school because kids will watch YouTube instead of paying attention in class. And they wrote back and said, well, why wouldn't you want YouTube? And it's like, okay. You clearly have not understood what I'm getting at. I think it's a Japanese developer, and I think there's a language barrier there too,
Right.
with that particular developer. And then the other one is NextPage. I would also recommend NextPage is a lighter version of all these other. And if you're on Android, there is an app called Mobile Sheets that's also on Windows. And you can use that for a PDF music reader or sheet music reader. There used to be one called Orpheus on Android. I'm not sure if it's still out there. And then if you are a Mac or PC user, Windows PC user, the granddaddy of them all is a application called MusicReader that I think is still a $70 app.
Whoa.
For your device. But that was the first PDF music reader before the iPad came along, or even before the old. Remember the Musicpad Pro? Did you ever see one of those in person?
Oh yeah. Never in person.
Yeah, we actually bought 2 of them for our new school that we opened in 2009, and then by the time the iPad rolled out that next April, that device was dead in the water because who would want to spend their money on it? The band director bought the band director's version that was like the huge screen, and I had one of the just normal kind of like almost iPad size ones, but it was like 10 times as thick. And they worked, but it was that first generation of the technology, and later we ended up auctioning them off, which was how our school allows us to dispose of resources. So you have to document it, but you can auction off something, and then as long as you have the receipt, then you can put that money back in and buy something else for your school. Now the kicker was that was a $900 device just by itself, and I think the smaller ones sold for $400. So we took a $500 loss on that device in the span of about a year and a half.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of different options out there, but I guess I know you use digital music, right? I mean, I've seen you taking pictures of it and scanning it with your phone apps that you've done, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the benefits that you see as a band director? Because I know that I hear from a lot of band directors and orchestra directors that the iPad is too small for their music or what they need to do.
For me, I don't. Well, okay, so I'm about to get a little bit philosophical and tell you a belief.
No, go for it. Hey, it's your podcast, right?
Sure. So and not everything that I believe, I practice. So I'm just telling you my belief, not a perfect practicer of this belief. But I really don't think that the place that I should be learning the music is on the podium in front of my band. The size of this, like really the music at that point should be like just kind of guiding me along, and if it has good annotations in it, it should show me like things that maybe I want to work on in rehearsal, or maybe some like big things that I want to jump out. Like maybe there's like a horn solo I want to cue in one particular place, or maybe I really want a big crescendo, so I'll like highlight the crescendo in red or something. But being able to read on a finer level, like what each and every note of the staff is not something that I feel like I need to do when I'm in front of the class. However, when I'm studying the score, I do want to be able to read that. Now, of course, I sit in a much closer proximity to my screen when I study. And, the iPad Pro and Apple Pencil really changed this for me. Like, I wasn't really able to, like, I found myself really continuing to do that study process on paper with a pencil until the Apple Pencil came along. And I still really prefer that tactile feel of turning paper with my hand and writing in pencil, but the Apple Pencil is accurate enough that I can really get in there. I can do 2-finger pinch to zoom in forScore, and I can, I've customized my own little tool that's like a really thin and somewhat opaque black line, so it looks almost like a pencil, and I can write on it. And so those notes, those little annotations are not really in my way when I'm looking at the score from far away, but I can zoom in and see things like chord analysis, or sometimes I like to go in and like write 1s, 3s, and 5s next to all the notes in a chord to remind me who like is playing the first, the third, the fifth of the chord at a glance. So yeah, I think that it is not too small. Like I said a little bit ago, I'm even considering my next iPad getting this 10.5 inch and using that on the podium. So no, I don't think it's impossible to use. I'm curious though. I have 2 colleagues who I share an office with. One of them is the other band director, and one of them is the orchestra director, and they're both very tech savvy, in some respects more than myself. And they just both happen to have really old iPads, so they're not really into the score thing. But I'm curious to see like if either of them update their iPad in the coming years, if they really gravitate towards this score thing, or if that just is something they try and then find it wanting.
It's real interesting. I like your philosophical statement. The question the one that the redundant response becomes, okay, but how many of us are actually given the time in our schedules to prepare that way? I don't know about you, but I know, for example, our prep periods don't really become prep periods. They become something else. Required meetings, having to do grading, having to do the grunt work, whereas, the idea of pure score study is anything but, that's a whole nother question.
Well, that's why debate. I said I don't always practice it. It's just what I believe.
Well, and I mean, it's a great belief too. But I think a lot of that, it was too small. It was before the 12.9 came out. And then the question or the statement's going to be, well, the device is too expensive, or it's going to be too big. Will be the next response. And I guess there's just some people just don't want to leave paper. And man, I don't know. I just think there are so many benefits to once you move to that digital format. And you lose so much when you move back to paper.
Well, score.
I've had
Yeah, go ahead.
Go for it.
The score, doing the score on the screen, on an iPad, screen resolution in particular, is for me the way that I conceptualize the entire existence of the iPad. Like I really push my iPad from a productivity standpoint, but really my work machine is my Mac, and the thing that keeps me reaching for my iPad is either now with the Apple Pencil, something like drawing or note-taking or anything that's creative involving maybe like making a chart or a graph, or it's scores, because those are the things that make my iPad shine. Because if you treat for me, if I treat my iPad like it is actually a piece of paper and I use it for things that I do in the real physical world with pen and paper, then it shines in every instance. And scores are the number one way that they do, especially because there's nothing on a desktop PC that can match it. Like the form factor is perfect for studying and reading scores.
No, I'm with you. And there's all those other benefits too, such as you can annotate in color in terms of, so if you're actually doing real score prep, the way that some of us were taught in college or master's and doctorate level courses, you can highlight in colors, you can circle notes and write in different colors, you can go in depth, you can type notes, you can go into that deep levels of things. But then there's so many other hidden benefits, and this again is just using forScore, although other apps like unrealBook will have these too. I'll just give you another example. This last spring at our spring concert, I had a number of students that were going to play ukulele with me in the concert with the choirs as we sang. So I then had the challenge of, well, how do I help these kids out? Because they're not going to be able to use Showbie easily playing ukulele, because a page turn in Showbie is a kind of a drag versus a touch. And I have forScore set so that it changes page on a touch versus a drag, because a drag is too much motion for me while I'm conducting or playing piano or playing ukulele. I just don't have the time if I'm not using my foot pedal. So how could I do this? So I started photocopying songs for them, and some of the songs are 7 pages long. And I just stopped, and I just said, wait a second, I bet you there's a solution. And I had totally forgotten about forScore's queue setting. So what this does is, if you have forScore installed on different devices and they all have the same music, and you can share libraries. Now, there's some things that don't share perfectly. I think we talked about that in the last episode as well, that we had talked about. If you turn on queue on those other iPads and you set them to follow you, and then you set your iPad as the master, when you change a page in forScore, it changes on all the other devices. And if you change a song in forScore, it jumps to the other song in forScore. So in our concert, I was able to change pages for our students without them ever having to touch the iPad at the same time that I was changing pages. And that's built right into the functionality of the app.
That's amazing.
And it saved me a ton of photocopying and taping and putting things together, and it worked flawlessly, unless I accidentally double pressed the pedal, which happened a couple of times. But you survive.
Yeah. So just a few minutes ago, you were listing a bunch of different competing apps that can do this stuff, and I'm going to put all of those in the show notes. I don't think we have time to really cover all of them.
Right.
I guess since I know that we're both really primary forScore users, and since forScore is the one that I recommend more than any of the others to any teacher who's just looking, like, just tell me the one app I should use, and I always tell them forScore. So for that reason, I imagine we're gonna spend most of our time talking about it. But I guess I wanted to ask you, like, do you keep all of these different score apps installed on your iPad? Are there things that you regularly use other apps for? Like, do you take out unrealBook on a regular basis and use it for just one feature, or is forScore your primary? Like, and I'm just talking about the way that you're interacting with the score. I mean, I know you have being at a one-to-one school, you have all these really awesome use cases for things you can do with the students holding iPads in their hands. But like, for just your own personal interactions with scores, what are you actually doing with these other competing apps that you can't do with forScore?
That's a good question. I also should mention that Newzik also allows for PDF and music XML files, and we talked about that in the last episode as well. But just that should also go in the notes. Ultimately, forScore tends to be my primary go-to app. Although I will always tell people that they should also have one more app as a backup, and in my case, that's unrealBook. UnrealBook is almost as fully featured as forScore, and both are smaller companies. I know for sure UnrealBook is one guy, and we did a blog or a podcast with him, Aaron Nelson, some time ago. Just a wonderful guy living in Hawaii, and he's looking at doing some other things with UnrealBook in the future. And then for the other ones, we were trying to use, just so I can be honest about it, Next Page I was trying to use with my students and we even bought a bunch of the apps, because in an app store, if you're a educational institution, you can buy apps at generally 50% off if the developer allows it. And you can get your apps for your students, and you can check out those apps to them and then withdraw them back and reassign them from year to year, which is really kind of a nice tool. But a couple things happened there is that there were a couple things that NextPage wasn't doing so nicely at the time. The developer is really a nice gentleman, and he's fixed a lot of those. But NextPage also came out with a new version. So ultimately, I keep all of them on my device just to play with from time to time. In fact, there's another one, DeepDish Gig Book, is out there.
Oh, I've never heard of that one.
Yeah, that one's kind of interesting because it offers some like binding abilities. So like if you take songs out of like a fake book, you can rebind them into another, kind of like making a playlist out of it. It does some nice things there. And then one of the other grand daddies is iGigBook, and that developer had some very, very harsh words for me early on. So his product is still out there, and we got into an argument about whether or not a music reader needed annotation at the time. And I still don't know if iGigBook, I don't touch that app after some of the mean things that developer said years ago. I just kind of leave him alone. But ultimately, that app is out there too, and has a big following for people and gigging musicians that play out of gig books. And I know you were writing recently about how to make an index for forScore, but we'll come back to that a little bit later. But anyhow, so back to your question is, generally forScore is my number one. And if anything happens to forScore, which can happen, for example, at a switch of iOS, so if iOS 11 comes out, it's not uncommon for an app to start glitching or to have some problems. Or if an update happens that actually ends up breaking an app, that happens too. I've got a backup app because, again, music is just too important to me. And since most of my scores are stored in the cloud, it can be minutes before I'm up and running again with whatever I'm doing. So if I'm doing tomorrow I'm playing at a ukulele at a veterans home with a number of other players here in the Twin Cities, and we've been doing that lately. If something would happen to forScore between now and then, I would have unrealBook to be able to download from and be able to use in a performance, and it would almost be seamless. So ultimately, yeah, and my students are using Showbie as their score reader of consequence, and that's kind of it. So really, those are the big three. And I don't know, which ones do you use, Robbie? Is it just forScore?
I've got a couple of them installed on my iPad. But yeah, I mean, for me, forScore is what I'm interacting with most. It's on my dock. I use it almost exclusively. I was using unrealBook just for that indexing feature with a couple of my copies of RealBooks, but then forScore added it. So now I'm feeling like, I'm of the mind of like everything in one place is my supreme goal when possible, and then turn to other resources when I need to. And I fiddle with the others from time to time just to kind of see what's going on with them. But yeah, that was a big one. That indexing feature really kind of crossed unrealBook off of my list, at least for regular use.
And I know he's recently, for example, he was keeping a version of unrealBook alive for iPad 1s. And I don't even know if that's available anymore, because I think Apple, I know for sure with iOS 11, they're shutting down any app that isn't 64-bit compatible. So all the older 32-bit apps, which includes anything I think from the iPad 4 and newer, they're just, those apps are not going to be able to be downloadable again. I'm not sure how they're going to handle that, because it effectively says that if you have an iPad 1 or 2 or the iPad mini 1 or 2, you're kind of out of luck. But he was keeping a version of that alive, whereas all the other developers had moved on, which makes sense because, the latest iOS is, but I think that iPad 1 is stuck at like iOS 7 or something. I can't remember where they stopped. I'd have to look that up.
Yeah, I can't imagine the iPad 1 can get iOS 7 even, but yeah, that's interesting.
And I still remember how slow some of those page turns were with
Uh-huh.
large files, you know? So,
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's really nice of him to keep that working for the first iPad for so long. I mean, you definitely don't have to do that if you're a developer.
nope. And again, when you get to know these people, and that's really the fun part. That's the angle of our podcast that I really like, is just getting to know more about the developers and developing relationships with people. That's kind of the part that I like. Um, is just you find out that most of these guys are just guys that are just have an idea, and they have the ability or the time or the resources to make something happen, and they go make it happen. So anyway, but yeah, it's understandable. forScore is really it, and they were even demoed in the App Store. I don't know if there's still one of the demo apps, so I haven't checked lately.
Not when I went into the store this weekend, but for a long time, yeah, if you walked up to any iPad in an Apple store, it would have forScore installed.
And I usually like go in there and write annotations on like the scores that were there, just to see if anybody had ever go and check out the app. But I'm not sure anybody ever did. So
It's a great app. Well, it just has a very complete feeling, and I think it's for that reason that when someone asks me that question, just tell me what I need to download. Well, what is forScore right now? Is it like $7?
well, that's a great question. That's also a tricky question, because once you buy it, you can't easily find out what its current value is or what
Yeah,
its current cost
it just
is.
says download or open.
See, I when I bought forScore, and it came out the week after the iPad came out. So when I first downloaded that was 99 cents. And I've emailed those guys a number of times, and I wouldn't say I know them well, but I keep telling them, and I've told Aaron this too, is like, there's something wrong when I'm still using 7 years later an app that I paid 99 cents for, and I have gotten $500 of use out of easily, in that time frame. But so I don't know. I don't know how developers keep making it financially when that happens either. But that's a whole other debate for another question.
Yeah.
So what tools do you use in forScore? What do you find yourself using?
Great question. For me, number one is search. I when I'm on the podium, I don't do. I mean, my book has a lot of stuff in it that might indicate that I really like to organize things, like properly add metadata like tags and make sure that the title is spelled correctly and that it has the composer name and the publishing date and all that stuff. The truth is if the title is correct, then I just hit that search button and then I start typing the first few characters of the score I want, and within a second I can get into any score in my database. We don't think of
Okay.
search as a feature, but for me, it's the thing. It's definitely the icon in the toolbar that I tap the most.
That's interesting, because I don't think I've ever used search.
Really?
Yep. Because what I do is, one of the things you can do is when you've uploaded your songs, you can make set lists. So I have set lists that are based for sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade, that I teach. Our musical, ukulele stuff, the piano music that I used to have and own. Even a few years ago, we had a reunion concert with my high school band, with our director, who was there, and heck of a good high school band program. He brought 3 different groups to Midwest over the years. So number of professional players that came out of that group. And anyway, so we had a reunion, and I had all of my Wind Symphony reunion music in there. But so when I have a set list, I don't ever have to search for something, because I have, when I open up, the literature for my sixth grade spring concert, I've got all the songs there, and I can easily switch, and I can even rearrange quickly with using the edit feature in that list. I can rearrange those songs for the rehearsal order the day that I want to do. So I never really have to use search. Set lists for me are really the power tool
Yeah,
for
I do
me.
that same exact workflow. Each one of my ensembles that I direct has a playlist with all the music we're currently working on in the class. And I love that, especially when we're getting close to a concert. and I put the program of the concert in order within that playlist, and all I have to do is just keep tapping the right side of the iPad, and it just cycles through all the different pages of all the different scores we're going to perform on stage in order.
Yep, I totally agree with you. That's exactly what I do. The other thing that I do is, and I don't have to do very often, because usually in choral music, our stuff is a one-shot song, right? So your song is there; it's encompassed. All the parts, if there are multiple parts, are there. However, when we get to like musical, the spring musical, or the winter musical, whatever we call it, you scan the score and you end up with a collection of 40 or 50 songs, which includes the incidental music in between scenes. And granted, this is middle school musical, but it works the same with high school. I've done it. What I do then is I make a bookmark for each of those songs, and then with that bookmark, I can arrange that into a playlist for the whole musical, so I can jump from song to song. And then inside of those songs, I can attach, because again, it's middle school musical, I can attach the audio for that particular song. So, we use an audio recording. In fact, I can attach multiple audios. So the first audio can be the actual just accompaniment file. The second file can be the accompaniment with demo tracks. And what I do is actually I set a student iPad up with that same format, so that there's a student that runs sound and runs the show basically from forScore, switching from song to song, starting it in forScore, letting it run, and then using the set list format to go to the next song when it's done. And that works incredibly well too. So the bookmarks have been fantastic.
That's awesome. Hey, Chris, can you hang on for just 1 second?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, hold on. My wife asked me to take the zucchini out of the oven in a text. We do late dinners here in the Burns household.
Apparently, yeah.
Yeah. So we were talking about buttons features we use. So bookmark is a good one. I hit the cloud icon quite a lot, I'm finding.
Okay. So you're downloading stuff from either iCloud Drive or Dropbox or Google Drive.
Yeah, and the iPad Pro screen is bigger, and so more of those buttons, more icons show up at the top. I love that I get one-tap access to the cloud button, because I really am, I keep my file management workflow. This is something we should probably dig into a little bit. I keep all of my PDF, my Sibelius, my Finale files in a folder in iCloud Drive called Scores.
Yep.
And I actually don't ever annotate those. I just leave clean copies in that folder. And what I do is with forScore, I pull down copies from the various different cloud drives that I access. So if it's something in my own personal library, I download it from iCloud into forScore. And if it's something that is in my band library, we have a Google Drive that we share, which has all the various files that we collaborate on, including score and parts for everything that our ensembles are working on in class.
Yeah, I do a very similar thing. So I basically I don't ever pull down a pre-annotated score. So, of course, annotation I use a lot. You've talked about using too.
Oh, of course, yeah. So did you know that you can make the Apple Pencil automatically trigger annotation mode?
Yeah, mine automatically did that. So as soon as I started writing on it, it does it.
Yeah, I love that. You used to have to go tap a button and go into a mode. And I would get around this sort of by, I had mapped in the settings to tap with 2 fingers to trigger annotation mode.
Yep.
It's funny how people think the same way about something that they totally have never talked about. Like that for you, the most logical thing to do with a 2-finger tap was also to go into annotation mode.
Right. And then what was 3-finger for you? Do you ever set up 3-finger?
Oh yeah, I did. Okay. Piano.
Okay.
Reference piano.
For me, that was, I think, piano 2. Let me check. I can find out. Yep, piano.
I love it.
Yep. That has always worked well for me. By the way, I'm the guy that made sure that I contacted forScore years ago and told them, well, with the piano, I have a lot of students that don't know how to read piano. Is there any way you could label the keys? So when you see those key labels in there, that's a result of one of my emails to forScore.
Oh, that's cool.
I mean, it's an easy solution, right? But you'd think everybody knows piano. Not really anymore. It's not as common as you'd think. Now, when you write with the Apple Pencil, does the whole annotation toolbar pop up for you?
Yeah, I think it does. I'm
Okay.
not holding my Apple Pencil right now, but yeah, so automatically triggers it, and then if I don't make contact with the pencil for about a second or a second and a half, then it automatically takes it out of annotation mode, and then the
Oh,
toolbar goes
really?
away. Yeah,
I didn't know that would do that. I've got to see if it'll do that, if it'll time out, or if there's another setting that I have to do. See, there's another brilliant, you know, solution by the
it's
result
one.
of
Yeah, it's one step closer to feeling like it's a piece of paper to not
yes.
have to trigger annotation mode. Now, what the next step would be, because sometimes it will react a half second later than my tap of the pencil. Like, what would be one step further is if eventually the entire notion of annotation mode even being a mode at all was just done away with. And it was just either your pencil is touching the screen and drawing something or it's not. And that's a really tough problem to solve. I use and have actually talked about in this podcast series a number of drawing and note-taking apps and PDF annotating apps. In fact, in the last episode with Paul, we talked a lot about PDF Expert. And, even PDF Expert doesn't have any kind of state you can put the document in where you can interact with it completely, but also just touch the pencil to the screen and start drawing. Like, you have to tap 1 or 2 times to get into annotation mode. In fact, the only app I know of that I use regularly where I can take a PDF on the screen and I can instantly start drawing on it like a piece of paper without any extra modes or taps or menus is Notability.
Have you tried GoodNotes or whatever? Have you tried
Uh,
that?
Sorry, GoodNotes is the other one, yes. Now,
Okay.
GoodNotes and Notability are, to me, two very great but slightly different versions of the same kind of thing. Like, they both function very similarly to one another.
No, I can see that.
But yes, GoodNotes is a fantastic app. So yeah, I mean, if forScore could get rid of that notion of there being a mode where you're annotating, then that would be cool. But I'm really happy with the arrangement I have now.
If Apple Pencil had an eraser, that would also be fantastic. Like you could turn it upside down and erase with the other side.
It's
That
got to
would
be
be
coming. It's got to be coming. I'd like to think that somewhere in their labs are numerous Apple Pencils that didn't ship that have all sorts of features, like some with buttons on them, some with different charging methods, some with erasers.
See, what I would like is for forScore just to enter annotation mode without bringing up the box and just marking that red, whatever I have my default color.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I want to annotate further, then I'll 2-finger tap and choose off the toolbox.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Yep.
Yep. And, and then I'd also let the people to erase on the fly too without having to enter annotation mode in that part. But you're right. I mean, it's pretty flawless right now, the way that it works. And I just found the setting, by the way, in the Apple Pencil deal to make it hide automatically, which was kind of like, oh, I didn't know it could do that. So that's now set.
I remember digging around for that option, hoping that it existed when I first got my Apple Pencil, and being really pleased to see that little checkbox that you're talking about.
Now, have you played around with any of their like kind of deep stuff, like the goal setting or anything like that?
I haven't. I haven't done a ton of that.
I haven't either, but basically it will actually track how you're doing in terms of goals of you can set goals for yourself and it will track your progress with things over time. Some of the stuff that it does is actually pretty amazing. So, there's analytics of how much time you spend and what apps you're using. There's, a question of how much time per day. It's really amazing that if you wanted to be a super analytical musician tracking your practice time and what songs you were practicing, you could actually do it in here. I wonder how many people actually use that feature.
Okay, so it's largely depending on how often certain scores are left open on the screen.
Correct. Yeah, that's the only way it can really track that, I would guess. And how much do you use the tuner, by the way?
I use the tuning drone sometimes. Like if I'm in a rehearsal and I just know that a certain piece is in a certain key and I want to hum that drone to the ensemble, then I will just get a quick reference pitch. And we actually, and I think we've talked about this before, my music team is like at least the instrumental part of the team is very philosophically into using tuning drones for teaching intonation.
Yep.
By ear, and we actually will use either a Dr. Beat plugged into a separate channel of our mixer or a tonal energy app in an iPhone running into a separate channel of the mixer at the front of the room. So I don't use the forScore tuner, like I don't project it through any speakers. I just sometimes will use it for my own personal reference.
I know that I've used the pitch pipe with high school choirs and doing a cappella pieces. I don't spend much time with the metronome. I don't know if you've one of the cool things about the metronome is it locks down whatever whatever meter you set, or whatever, meter and tempo, whatever you set, it remembers for the piece that you're on, which is pretty fantastic. And same with the pitch. Like if you choose a pitch, it's going to remember that pitch for that song. So you don't have to go and say, oh, what was the pitch I need to blow for this song? Once you have that set, it's going to remember that.
Yeah, I love that.
So,
and I've actually, go ahead.
No, go for it.
Well, I was just going to say I've been getting into that feature. There's these buttons you can create, these little hot buttons that will trigger some of those pitch pipe and metronome features. So I like to create a little red button that'll appear on the first page of a score, where when I tap it, it will, and the metronome doesn't have to make sound. Like it can just gently pulse the sides of the frame with this black image. So it's like a very subtle visual cue to the director without actually beeping.
Yep.
So I'll have a little hot button that will start that just to make sure my tempo is, if I'm like anxious on stage, I just make sure that I really have the tempo in my head. But what I haven't figured out, and I've noticed that it does remember my tempo for each score that's in my library, but maybe you can tell me this. I can't figure out how to create buttons for tempo changes on the various different pages. Like if it's 108 beats per minute on page 1, but the tempo slows down to 72 on page 8, forScore seems to always recognize whatever is the tempo that I set the metronome to on the first page of the score. Like in other words, if I put a metronome trigger button elsewhere in the score, it can only trigger the original tempo that I had established. I can't trigger different speeds.
I'm gonna try creating one right now as we're talking. So on the first page of the song, I just created a tempo of 120, and I'm gonna set the metronome to be visible with that. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to a later part of the score, and I'm gonna create a different button. I'm gonna set the tempo to 68, which should be very much. It says change tempo as an option.
So you're seeing an option that says change tempo.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna give it a shot and see if it works. So
okay,
I'm on the first page. I've got the tempo going at 120. The second page, third page, go to the new one, and sure enough, it slows down.
Interesting.
So,
okay.
Yeah, so it you can set that up if you
great.
want.
I'm learning on live the show. So that's great. that little change button option maybe is just something that I overlooked or that wasn't there at the time that I tried it, but that's really good to know.
And then if you want to delete any of those tempo buttons, what you have to do is you have to go in annotation mode, and there's a little minus sign, and you can delete those buttons. So that's, how do you delete something that you've created? Well, that's how you delete one of those things. So yeah, and again, it's not that I'm a super power user, but I'm not afraid to press buttons and see what happens. And one of their other cool features was the idea, they have templates now, so you can actually add like a blank staff page that you could write music on, so you can create a new score and literally use some of their template pages. Looks like they have piano grand staff that's got some extra space in it, single line staves, a set of 3 staves that are connected together with a bracket. I'm not sure who would use that. And then again, another sort of piano grand staff that you can use. So they really have added a ton of features to this thing. It's not never ending of the things that you can do.
Yeah, it's intense. I like now that you can also just scribble on, like with the Apple Pencil, on a blank piece of staff paper,
Yep.
which is something I previously was using third-party apps to do, and pretty much only to do. Like GoodNotes is a great example of an app that's a basic handwritten note app, but where you can get staff paper as your backdrop, and that's, I love GoodNotes, but that was one of the only things I was using it for, and now forScore has just made me need to tap one less app frequently on my homepage.
Now, I will say this too: if you are a director in a one-to-one school where you have iPads, and again, if you have any other platform, nothing is as good as the iPad for this. I'm sorry, but your device might be a wonderful device. Some of those Galaxy tabs are fantastic, but this is an area that the iPad just rules. It's, and like we've talked about, it's one of the primary reasons for a music educator to own an iPad. I really, truly believe that. But if you are in a one-to-one, what you need to know is that if you're teaching middle school or younger, forScore is probably not the app. There are too many buttons. But if you're teaching high school or above, I can't recommend it enough. And in fact, I even know, like, the New York Choral Society, they allow singers to bring iPads in, and they're suggested to use forScore. And there's people that help them, like Laurel Finkelstein is a person that we've interacted with over the years. Lauren, he helps people with that. But it's amazing how much has been added just in the last couple of years. So, like you said, those templates, that's new. And the one real weak part is there's a store, but there's really not much in the store, and I have a feeling that someday they'll just back away from the store. It'd be nice if we had a central clearinghouse. And in fact, here's my dream, Robbie, okay, is that you would contact Hal Leonard, and every year you would tell them that you had X number of students, and then you'd pay a fee for each of those students, whatever that fee is per student per year, and then you would have access to all publications that were centrally cleared by Hal Leonard, or and it'd have to be a consortium. So like Alfred would have to join in. The music, I'm trying to remember the name of the organization. There's another one, Music Sales, would join in. And basically everything that was available would be open to you to use with your students for a year for a subscription-based fee, kind of like Apple Music, but for sheet music. And then to be able to use that with your students. That's the dream. Because again, most of us have a budget. And if you're like me, I don't even have a budget. If I want to buy anything, I have to fundraise for it. Although, there was one source of money that came this year that was unexpected, but typically I've had a zero-based budget. So to be able to know that you have 300 students, and you know that each of those students has to pay a $10 or $12 fee, a school district could then plan ahead, and then you could download those pieces of paper for that year. Now you might say, what about the local music shop that normally sells, the stuff? Well, then the music stores could certainly pay those, or the music publishers could pay those music stores to come out and just check compliance once or twice a year, and then for those schools that didn't have iPads, they could print out the sheet music for a year, because again, it's cheaper to photocopy right now than it is to spend, for example, a choral score, $225 on a choral score. So I'm not sure what the exact dollar amount is, but that's the dream. That's where I wish we could go.
Yeah, I love it. I love that idea. I almost thought when Noteflight Learn was launched, which is a sort of a competing platform to Smart Music, I had this idea in my head that maybe the direction that this industry was going was that we were going to see, PracticeFirst is one of the others out there. I had this bad feeling that we were going to start to see different publishers pairing with different software platforms, and that we were almost going to see it would be like the same problem we have with TV and movie entertainment now, where instead of like one source of everything, we were going to have, like, there was going to be a Netflix over here and a Hulu over here and an HBO over here. It was going to be like, maybe Noteflight has a relationship with Hal Leonard, so they're going to have a $7 a month thing that gives you these scores. And then over here is this publisher. And it was going to end up being ultimately a really segregated and bad experience. It doesn't seem like even that has quite happened yet.
Although they all do have their own apps. So, Sheet Music Direct has its own app. Sheet Music Plus has its own apps. Although one of those companies recently decided to stop that nonsense. And now everything that you buy, it just comes down to you as a PDF. And it's got a stamp on the bottom that says that you bought it, X number of copies. But they're not playing the game anymore of, oh, you have to use our dedicated, app to read it, which that was death. Can you imagine that? Okay, kids, take out your iPads. Now for this song, you need to open the Alfred app. And for this song, you need to open the Hal Leonard app. And in this one, you need to open the Carl Fisher app. I mean, that would be just death. So that was encouraging. But yeah, and Noteflight Learn is part of the way there. And I think, again, Don Malinsak is now the vice president of, I think, sales, I think is his official title, with Noteflight and Noteflight Learn. And heck of a good guy, great presenter, and former band teacher. So he gets it. And in fact, if anybody in the entire music industry gets it, he gets it. He's out at ISTE right now, presenting out there. And he is behind a lot of these integration and changes with Noteflight, and working as Noteflight is a part of Hal Leonard. He's been working with them. So when you buy Noteflight Learn for your school, you get access to X number of publications that are out there, and you can do a lot with them. But the one thing you can't do is print them out. So that leaves schools that aren't one-to-one kind of in a bad spot. So I'm hoping that he's continuing the efforts, but again, he's now seeing the other side of it too, with the business model behind it. So I get it. And by the way, you know that the same company that owns smartmusic now owns Alfred.
Yep.
And actually, PracticeFirst is owned by the other organization, Music Sales. Mm-hmm. So there are three major forces out there, each that owns a huge percentage of the publishing industry. So yeah, I don't know. I can't imagine going back. Whether it be changing pages, dealing with a vocal book that flips closed on you, dropping a folder. Man, as a choir director, there's a point. Now this is almost 9 years ago, but when I had my first iPad, I had a student teacher that came and worked with me as well, and she had to have a folder full of paper copies. And between 6 choirs, I think there were 64 sheets or different selections of music that we were working on. And she had to organize 64 different sheets of music where I had forScore and unrealBook, where everything was arranged in set lists. And I never had to worry about a drop folder, music going everywhere, and putting stuff out of order, and keeping things organized for rehearsal. And considering that the whole premise of your book is digital organization for music teachers, I don't know how you could be any more organized or be helped with your organization than having your music organized and ready to go.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, it's the one of the things that I look at my iPad, and specifically the form factor of the iPad, as it's just one of the things that only an iPad can do. Like, sure, forScore could potentially be on a Mac, but who would want to have a Mac sitting holding a Mac in their hand and reading music, or putting a Mac on a music stand and playing from it? You wouldn't. It's the unique form factor of the iPad that makes software like that shine. It's really great.
So I will add that I know you have a little different situation where you have typically a conductor's, the whole podium and that director's music stand in front of you. So putting a 12.9-inch iPad up there is not it's heck, the traditional music folders that the students probably have, those JW Pepper things that are, 15 inches high and 13 inches wide, those giant things. That fits easily on that. But for me, I have the company's called AirTurn, and they make pedals, but they also make something called the Go stand. And it's a collapsible music stand that they have a tablet holder that even works with a 12.9-inch iPad. And that's pretty darn incredible too. It keeps your iPad secure and keeps it in front of you. And you can set it at different heights, even for like when I'm playing off of a digital piano or when I'm playing ukulele or directing in front of a choir. So I would recommend that too as like kind of a needed accessory with your iPad if you're gonna use iPad for music reading.
Yeah, I agree. I love mine. I actually use mine far more often when I'm performing than when I'm directing. Um, it's funny, like having 2 pages of music in front of you is definitely a luxury that you lose when you have just a single iPad screen. And at the very first time I took my iPad on a gig, I was performing timpani. It was an Easter service at a local church. And I thought to myself, this is a real bummer. I can see so much less music. I have to turn the page twice as often. And then came this moment where in the lower right corner there was a measure that had a timpani roll in it. And as I saw that roll coming, I thought to myself, oh man, I'm not going to be able to turn that page while I'm rolling on the drum. And then it hit me, no wait, I have a foot switch right here under my right foot. And then I switched it, and then boom, just like that, handless page turning.
Now, I do know of one guy, I believe his name is Ron Weiler. I'll have to double check that later. He's another choir guy on Twitter. I recently got rid of my choir guy annotation on Twitter and just went to CJR PhD. Because I'm not just a choir guy anymore. I mean, my life has morphed a little bit. And anyway, so he has a personal iPad Pro, and he has an iPad Pro 12.9-inch that the school gave him to use as well. So he is able to set up that queue function, and you can set up the queue so that it turns 2 pages at once. So he is always looking at 2 ginormous iPad screens right next to each other.
That's crazy.
And yeah, I know. So, I mean, think about the potential of that. If your school, and that's where I always tell teachers too, by the way, which is, you know what, you should be thinking about buying your own iPad. Because then if something happens and you're no longer at that school, and things happen, different job opportunities occur, changes in leaderships in your school, changes in culture in your school, for good or for bad, may end up causing you to take a different direction in your life. And if you leave all the technology behind, you're in a worse place than you were before because it's gone. So I do encourage teachers to own their own iPad. I really do. And if a school buys you one then too, well, then you have that functionality. Now, I don't know if you saw it, but have you seen the Gvido yet?
No.
Okay, as Paul and I were talking about this, we didn't know how to pronounce it, but there's a company in Japan, I believe, that's making 2 giant 12.9-inch e-ink screens.
Oh, I have seen this. This was on Scoring Notes a week or two ago.
Yes, and maybe even last week. But that news is out, and the device isn't out yet. But they're going to want $1,600 for 2 12.9-inch e-ink screens together. And I think I would rather buy 2 iPad Pros and try to develop a case to hold them both.
Right. I thought about mentioning that that device earlier when we were talking about your school originally buying the what was that one called?
The Musicpad Pro.
The Musicpad Pro. What really distinguishes? Is it Gvido?
Yeah, that's because it's giving a tribute back to Guido d'Arezzo.
Oh, right. Yes.
But it's spelled like Gvido, like Gvido. I mean, Paul and I were tripping over it saying, how do you pronounce this thing? Well, it's Gvido, turns out.
So what distinguishes that device from the one that you bought early on back in the 2009?
Well, that Musicpad Pro was basically a Windows laptop touchscreen.
I see.
That's what it was at the time, and terrible resolution, terrible battery life, but it was stellar. In fact, I still remember a number of years ago, NAFME used to run its national conferences at the state conferences, and they haven't done that anymore. They do their own national conference every year, and I think they're doing it down in Texas now, I think in Galveston. And one year in March, we hosted the National Music Association conference instead of our Minnesota Music Conference. So, and the Big Phat Band, I don't know if you've ever seen them or heard of them.
I have.
They're fantastic, by the
They're
way.
awesome. Great books too. Like they have a really good drum set play along book with a lot of the charts in it.
Unbelievable. Gordon Goodwin. I mean, they're fantastic. Anyway, they performed off of those Musicpad Pros. They had a set of them that they were using, and they did a whole comedic thing of comparing paper to the Musicpad Pro in the middle. I'm sure Musicpad Pro was paying for part of their expenses or something for that or whatever, but it was hilarious. The musicians playing from paper, as they switched from chart to chart, were having to throw their paper, and as Gordon would call out a different song, they just have to like whip their paper off and be to the next one, whereas the people on the iPad Pro were just pen touch to the screen, select and go. And even then you could see how that was going to revolutionize music reading and music performance. And the catch is now, so how do we get that into the hands of students? And then how do you keep students focused? But that's a discussion for another time.
Yeah. Yep. Well, so I mean, this has been fun. We've covered a lot of the features. I got to tell you, we didn't talk about indexing yet, and I did just a few weeks ago do a post. I made a little video tutorial of how to basically take a large file in forScore and associate an index with it, which is basically where you take a CSV file where in one column you have all the song titles, and then another column you have all the page numbers of the file linked up, so that you can attach this CSV file in forScore to one of your scores, which in the case of something like a RealBook, where it has tons, like hundreds of song titles, but you have to actually just like what I was doing previously is if someone at a gig would call out a tune, like All of Me. Well, All of Me is the first song in the RealBook. That bad example. But like, Kind of Blue, you are like, that's an album. I'm doing a terrible job explaining this problem. But the point is that you would just have to like drag your index finger on that little like scrubber that turns the pages of the book, and like just a little centimeter will turn like 10 pages. So now with this indexing feature, you can basically associate each of those individual song titles with a place in the file. And then those song titles join your library. So like you were talking about making set lists and playlists. Well, one of the other things you can do in forScore is just simply browse all of your songs. Well, now instead of just realbook.pdf, I actually have a song title in my library for every single one of those songs. So if I want to jump to a song, I just tap the title of it and it takes me straight to that page of that file. And it's going to be a huge time saver for sure.
And likewise too, on a similar note, you can go into forScore by touching on the main title. You can set all sorts of metadata if you want to for your songs. You can go into depth and title and composers and genres and various tags, labels, ratings, difficulty, time, locking down key. You can put all that stuff in. From that center column, you can also adjust the audio files that are attached to it. You can attach MIDI cues. So if you were a performing musician, you could actually send a MIDI out value to your keyboard, which is something that goes beyond what I need to do. And that's all pretty cool. In terms of that, but I think the suggestion that both you and I have is you download the songs you need rather than your entire library. I think both of us would say that, because if you need something, it's in the cloud and you can download it almost anywhere, anytime. And if you don't need it, then why bother with it? Now, I imagine there's going to be some people that want their entire library on their device, but that would just become, well, that's where your search feature would become very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of practicality, it's the same with scanning. How do you get music from paper onto your device? The answer is the same way that you eat an elephant, which is one bite at a time. So you get one score in, and you work with that, and then you get the second one in, and the third one in, and then suddenly within a few days, maybe even one night, you've got an entire ensemble's music ready to go, and then you just add to that. And if you're like you or I will come back in the fall likely with everything ready to go at some point. But because everything's already scanned for both you and I, we probably can do that even during that limited amount of time during our in-service weeks, or week to do that in the limited time that we're now given. Because, I don't know if you guys are like us, but that in-service time really isn't in-service time anymore. They've just added meeting after meeting after meeting instead of what used to be teacher prep time. So it's doable. You can really do this, and you can do it one song at a time. And if you haven't figured out scanning, listen to that previous podcast with Robbie. He's got some great apps listed there that you can even use your phone to use.
Yeah, you said it best. One piece at a time. All elephant and animal-loving people can email you.
Well, the circus is no longer performing with elephants, so we're safe there. But it's that old joke, right? You've heard this joke of where the guy goes into a restaurant and there's a sign that says, "We will make you anything that you order." And he said, "Okay." So he sits down, and if we can't order it, we'll give you $100. So he goes, "Okay, all right, I want $100." So he sits down, and the waiter comes. He goes, "All right, what would you like?" He said, "You know what?" He said, "I would like to order elephant ear in a bun." The waiter goes, "Okay." So he goes back to the kitchen, and about 10 minutes later, he comes out and he says, "Sir, here's your $100." And I goes, "Haha, I knew it. You didn't have elephant ears." And he said, No, we just ran out of buns." So, bad joke, right? Bad joke. But it's that same idea as, one step at a time. I actually also heard about a guy that once ate a car piece by piece. He ate the entire car. So he would break up the glass or the metal and swallowed every piece by piece. I don't know why you would do that, but in the same way, you can break up your music piece by piece and get into your iPad and work with it. But don't literally break your iPad. That's not a good situation.
Eating in a car, that's going to stick with me for days.
Well, I have to see if it's on. I know I've read about it, and I've got to see if I can find a YouTube video about it, because somebody must have filmed that at some point.
Gosh.
Hopefully it was like a Yugo or something, something small. Smart car.
Unreal. Well,
yeah, it's late, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've covered most of the forScore stuff. All right. Well, I'm off.
All right.
This
well,
has been fun, and yeah.
Always good to talk to you, man.
Super.
All right.
All right.
We'll talk to you later, Robbie.
All right. Talk to you later.
All right.
Bye.
See ya. Bye.